The dusty corner of the Hartford Historical Society held many forgotten items, but none caught Dr. Sarah Mitchell's eye like the carved wooden frame leaning against a filing cabinet. The old wedding portrait from 1903 showed what looked like a normal Victorian ceremony. A stiff groom in a sharp black suit stood beside his bride, who wore a detailed white dress trimmed with fine lace. Sarah, a photography historian who focused on early American portraits, had examined thousands of similar photographs. The rigid poses, the serious faces, the careful way hands and fabric were arranged, all looked completely normal for that time. The bride's face showed the expected calm and serious look common in photographs from that era, when long exposure times made smiling difficult. Still, something bothered Sarah as she lifted the frame closer to the window. The late afternoon sunlight from Connecticut poured through the glass, lighting up details that had been hidden in the dim archive room. She adjusted her glasses and stared at the image, feeling a strange pull toward the bride's face. "Just another wedding photo," she whispered. Yet her fingers slowly traced the edge of the frame, as if guided by something unseen. On the back of the photograph was a small handwritten note: Thomas and Elizabeth, June 15, 1903, Hartford. There was no last name and no photographer's mark, nothing else to identify them. The couple appeared well off. Their clothing and the professional quality of the image suggested they belonged to Hartford's growing middle class. As Sarah moved to place the portrait aside with many others waiting to be catalogued, a beam of sunlight struck the glass at just the right angle for a brief second. Something in the bride's expression caught her attention. It was something that should not have been there, something that went against everything Sarah knew about early 20th century photography and social rules. Her heart started to pound as she realized this simple portrait might be hiding something extraordinary. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she carried the frame to her desk and set it under the adjustable lamp she used for close inspection. She picked up her magnifying glass, a tool that had uncovered many hidden details during her 15 years of research. From a distance, the bride's face had seemed properly serious, but under magnification something unusual appeared. Sarah blinked, sure her eyes were playing tricks on her. She adjusted the focus and leaned in closer, her heartbeat growing faster. There it was, faint but clearly visible, something that should have been impossible in 1903. The bride was smiling, not a stiff or forced smile like those seen in later decades, but a real gentle lift at the corners of her mouth that suggested quiet joy or perhaps a private joke. "That can't be," Sarah whispered into the empty room. Photography in the Victorian era required people to stay still for several seconds because of long exposure times. Smiling was not only hard to maintain but also seen as improper, especially in formal wedding portraits. The social customs of Hartford in 1903 demanded a serious and dignified expression. Sarah examined the technical side of the photograph. The image was unusually clear, far better than most amateur photos from that time. The lighting was carefully arranged, showing it had been taken in a professional studio. Yet here was a bride breaking every rule of proper portrait behavior. She studied the groom next. His face was firm and serious, exactly what was expected. His posture was stiff and formal. Everything about him reflected proper Victorian values, but Elizabeth seemed to be sharing a secret with the camera, or perhaps with someone standing just beyond the photographer. Sarah opened her laptop and began searching records of Hartford wedding photographers from 1903. She compared studio locations with the background details in the photo. The wallpaper pattern, the furniture, even the style of carpet under their feet might offer clues about where the photograph was taken. With each discovery, the mystery grew deeper. The next morning, Sarah found herself at Hartford's main library, surrounded by old city records and newspapers from 1903. She had barely slept, her thoughts fixed on the smiling bride. What began as professional curiosity had turned into true obsession. Wedding announcements from June 1903 in the Hartford Courants revealed nothing about a Thomas and Elizabeth married on the 15th. She widened her search to nearby towns like West Hartford, East Hartford, and Bloomfield, but still found nothing. It was as if the couple did not exist in official records at all. "Excuse me," Sarah said as she approached the librarian, Mrs. Peterson, who had worked there for more than 30 years. "I'm researching a couple from 1903, Thomas and Elizabeth. They were married on June 15th. Are there other sources I should check?" Mrs. Peterson adjusted her glasses and thought for a moment. "Have you looked at church records?" Smaller weddings were not always printed in newspapers. Trinity Episcopal keeps very good records. The Catholic churches also have archives going back to the 1890s. Sarah spent the rest of the day visiting churches around Hartford. At Trinity Episcopal, Reverend Williams led her to the basement archive, where thick leather-bound marriage registers were stored in climate-controlled cases. "June 1903, he said quietly, running his finger down the page. "June 13th, Thomas Martin and Elizabeth Hayes. June 20th, Thomas Richardson and Elizabeth Collins." There was nothing for June 15th with just first names. "What about unusual cases?" Sarah asked. "Anything that might have needed privacy?" Reverend Williams paused before answering. "There were sometimes marriages that were not exactly traditional. A pregnant bride, or couples from very different social classes. Those ceremonies might be kept quiet and recorded with little detail." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Could Elizabeth's strange smile be hiding a secret that required silence? As she walked back to her car under the warm afternoon sun, she felt certain she was close to uncovering something far more important than a strange photograph. Back at the Historical Society, Sarah decided to examine the portrait and its frame inch by inch. She carefully removed the photograph, hoping to find something behind it or within the mounting. Her careful work paid off. Between the photo and the cardboard backing was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Her hands trembled as she opened it and read the faded writing. "My dearest Thomas, by the time you read this, I will be far from Hartford. The photograph must tell the story I cannot. Look for what others cannot see. Remember our signal. Forever yours, E." Sarah stared at the message, her thoughts racing. Our signal. Could that mean the smile? Was Elizabeth trying to say something through her expression that society would not allow her to speak? She looked at the photograph, again, this time searching for anything else that seemed wrong. Using strong magnification, she noticed Elizabeth's left hand, partly hidden by the folds of her dress. Her fingers were arranged in a strange way, not the usual formal pose seen in wedding portraits. Took a digital photo of the hand and began researching secret forms of communication from the Victorian-era. She learned how women sometimes sent messages through fans, flowers, and even hand gestures. In a book on etiquette from 1902, she found a section on finger signals, quiet hand signs used to share messages when speaking openly was not allowed. Certain finger positions could signal danger, love, or urgency. Elizabeth's hand matched one of the drawings exactly. It was a warning signal meaning help or this is not what it seems. Sarah leaned back, feeling the weight of the discovery. This was not just a strange wedding portrait, it was a desperate attempt to leave proof of something terrible. Elizabeth's smile was not happiness or humor, it was a brave cover for fear, and her hidden hand signal was a silent cry for help that no one had noticed for more than 120 years. With the note and the hidden messages in mind, Sarah expanded her research to missing persons reports and newspaper articles from the summer of 1903. She searched police records, hoping to find any mention of a woman named Elizabeth who vanished around that time. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected place, the society pages of the Hartford Courants from July 1903. Hidden in a small paragraph about summer gatherings was a brief note. The ladies of the Hartford Women's Auxiliary expressed concern for Mrs. Elizabeth Hayes, who failed to attend the quarterly charity luncheon despite confirming her attendance. Elizabeth Hayes was one of the names Reverend Williams had read from the marriage register, but that wedding was dated June 13th, 2 days before the date written on the photograph. Sarah hurried back to Trinity Episcopal, her heart racing. Reverend Williams brought out the register again, and this time Sarah looked closely at the entry. The handwriting was different, and the ink looked darker, as if it had been added later. "Reverend Williams," she asked, "is it possible this entry was written afterward, maybe backdated?" He studied the page carefully, concern crossing his face. "It could be. In 1903, some marriages were recorded later for legal reasons. If a couple married privately or under unusual conditions, they might register afterward to avoid scandal." Sarah's search then led her to the Hartford Police Department's historical archives in the basement of City Hall. Officer Martinez, a young officer interested in local history, helped her sort through rows of old filing cabinets. "Missing persons from 1903, he said, pulling out a thick folder. "There are quite a few. Hartford was expanding fast back then. People moved in and out all the time." Sarah's breath caught when she saw one report dated July 20th, 1903. Elizabeth Hayes, age 23, reported missing by her sister Margaret, last seen at home on July 15th. Brown hair, green eyes, about 5 feet 4 inches tall. Family noted strange behavior in the weeks before she vanished. The missing person report listed her garret's address on Asylum Street, in what was Hartford's most stylish neighborhood in 1903. Sarah learned that the original Victorian house was still standing, though it had been divided into apartments. The current owner, an elderly man named Robert, welcomed her inside after she explained her historical research. "The Hayes family?" Robert said slowly, nodding as he thought. "I've lived here for 40 years. The owner before me mentioned finding some old papers in the attic when he renovated. They might still be there." In the dusty attic, hidden beneath layers of insulation added many years later, Sarah discovered a small wooden trunk. Inside were letters, photographs, and papers that had belonged to the Hayes family. Her hands trembled as she opened a diary with Margaret Hayes written neatly on the cover. The diary entries from the summer of 1903 revealed a troubling story. June 10, 1903. "Elizabeth has been behaving oddly since she met that man, Thomas. She says little about him, only that they plan to marry. I have not been introduced, which is very unusual for my dear sister." June 16, 1903. Elizabeth returned from her wedding ceremony changed. She smiles when she thinks no one is looking, but there is fear in her eyes. She begs me not to ask questions about Thomas or where they live. July 1st, 1903. I followed Elizabeth today and learned she is not living with Thomas as she claimed. Instead, she rents a small room above Mrs. Patterson's bakery on Main Street. When I confronted her, she broke down and admitted the marriage was arranged to help her escape something terrible. She would not say more. July 14th, 1903. Elizabeth came to me tonight in great distress. She said Thomas was not who he pretended to be, and that she had learned something that placed her in danger. She spoke of leaving Hartford at once, and asked me to keep a photograph she said would explain everything if anything happened to her. I begged her to go to the police, but she said they would not believe her. July 21st, 1903. My sister is gone. I have reported her missing, but the police seem uninterested. They suggest she may have simply left with her husband, even though I insist Thomas is also missing and that the marriage was strange from the start. Sarah's hands shook as she closed the diary. Elizabeth's smile in the wedding portrait was not happiness. It was the brave expression of a woman leaving behind proof of danger, knowing it might be the last trace of her life. Margaret's diary gave Sarah important clues about Thomas, but she needed firmer facts about the mysterious groom. She returned to the 1903 Hartford City Directory, this time searching every man named Thomas and matching their jobs and addresses. One listing stood out: Thomas Miller, private detective, office at 245 Main Street. The address was only 3 blocks from Mrs. Patterson's bakery, where Elizabeth had secretly been living. Sarah's research into private detectives in Hartford during 903 revealed a profession that was often unclear and risky. Private investigators at that time often worked for wealthy families, sometimes to quietly handle scandals or track people who held valuable information. At the Hartford History Museum, Sarah found a collection of business cards and advertisements from the period. Thomas Miller's card was displayed in an exhibit on early 20th century professions. Thomas Miller, discreet investigations, recovery of missing persons and valuable items, confidential consultations available. The museum curator, Dr. James Walsh, knew a great deal about Hartford's business world from that era. Private detectives in 1903 worked in a gray zone, he explained. Some were honest professionals, others were little more than hired muscle for whoever could pay. What kind of cases might involve a young woman like Elizabeth? Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh thought carefully. Wealthy families sometimes hired investigators to retrieve runaway daughters or recover stolen documents. There were also blackmail cases. Detectives could be hired either to stop it or to assist with it. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was Elizabeth a target instead of a willing bride? The evidence now suggested the wedding portrait was not showing a real marriage, but some form of pressure or control. More troubling details emerged as Sarah researched Thomas Miller further. A Hartford Courant article from September 1903 reported his death in what was called a tragic accident at the railroad yards. The short article stated that Miller had been investigating a case involving missing documents when he supposedly fell from a moving freight car. The timing felt wrong. Just 2 months after Elizabeth vanished, Sarah began to believe that both Elizabeth and Thomas were caught in something far more dangerous than a simple disappearance. Sarah's investigation reached a turning point. She needed to understand what Elizabeth might have known or possessed that placed her in danger. Margaret's diary said Elizabeth had discovered something about Thomas, but gave no details. Back at the Historical Society archives, Sarah expanded her search to major Hartford news from 1903. She looked for events that might require a private detective and could have drawn Elizabeth into the situation. Her effort paid off when she found articles about a large embezzlement scandal at Hartford National Bank in May 1903. Around $50,000 had gone missing, a huge amount equal to more than $1.5 million today. Bank President William Thornton had hired private investigado RS to recover the money and identify the thief. One of the investigators named was Thomas Miller. Sarah's pulse raced as she connected the dates. The theft was discovered in early May. Thomas was hired soon after. Elizabeth's diary suggested she met Thomas in late May or early June. Their wedding portrait was dated June 15th. Elizabeth disappeared in July. Thomas died in September, but who was Elizabeth in this story? Sarah reread Margaret's diary, looking closely for hints about Elizabeth's job or social ties. She found the answer in an entry from spring 1903. Elizabeth has secured a position as a secretary at Hartford National Bank. She is very pleased as the pay is good and the work is respectable for a young woman. Sarah's heart pounded. Elizabeth worked at the same bank where the money vanished. She would have had access to records and transactions that could reveal the true thief. If she discovered something that conflicted with Thomas's reports, or worse, proof that Thomas himself was involved, her life would have been in serious danger. The wedding portrait now made perfect sense. Thomas had used a false marriage to gain Elizabeth's trust and stay close to her. Elizabeth, realizing the threat, used the portrait session to record evidence of her situation. Her forced smile hid fear. Her hand signal called for help. Her note was meant to be found later as proof of the truth. Sarah knew she had to find official records of the embezzlement investigation. The Hartford Public Library newspaper archives held detailed coverage of the bank scandal throughout the summer of 1903. An article from August 1903 revealed a shocking turn. The missing money had been traced to forged documents and false transactions. The evidence did not point to a bank employee, but to someone with deep knowledge of bank procedures and access to official papers. The article quoted Bank President Thornton. "We have learned our investigation was compromised from within. The man we trusted to find the thief appears to have been the criminal himself, using his position to hide his actions while continuing to steal." Sarah's theory was confirmed. Thomas Miller had not been investigating the crime. He had been committing it, using his role as a private detective to access records and forge documents. Elizabeth had uncovered the truth. As a bank secretary, she could see the real records and notice differences between Thomas's claims and the actual transactions. The final piece came from a September 1903 police report Sarah found in the City Hall archives after Miller's death. Police searched his office and rooms. They found $30,000 in cash hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer, along with forged bank papers bearing Elizabeth's signature. A police note added the final chilling detail. Evidence suggests Miller forced Miss Hayes to sign documents confirming his fraudulent transactions. Her disappearance likely occurred when she threatened to expose him. Miller's death appears to be suicide rather than accident, possibly to avoid arrest. Sarah leaned back, overwhelmed by the tragic truth. Elizabeth had not been a willing bride. She was a victim, forced into helping an embezzlement scheme and then silenced when she became a danger. The wedding portrait was not a celebration. It was Elizabeth's desperate attempt to leave proof, knowing Thomas planned to erase her. Sarah's investigation uncovered a painful story of courage and victimization buried for more than 120 years. Elizabeth's hidden messages, her brave smile hiding terror, her secret hand signal, and her note pointing toward the truth had finally been understood. But Sarah knew her work was not done. She felt a duty to make sure Elizabeth's story was told and her bravery honored. She prepared a detailed report of her findings and contacted the Hartford Courant, hoping they would publish the story as a historical feature. The editor, Maria Rodriguez, was deeply interested. "This is exactly the kind of mystery our readers care about," she said. "More than that, it's the story of a woman who showed incredible courage under impossible conditions." Sarah also contacted genealogy websites, hoping to find living relatives of the Hayes family. Her search led to Patricia Hayes, a great-great-niece living in Boston who had long wondered about family stories of a relative who vanished in Hartford. "We always heard quiet stories about Aunt Elizabeth," Patricia said on the phone. "My great-grandmother used to say Elizabeth tried to expose a bad man and paid the price. I never knew if it was real." Patricia traveled to Hartford to see the portrait and learn the full story. Standing in the Historical Society, looking at Elizabeth's photograph with new understanding, she wiped away tears. "She was so young," Patricia whispered, "but she was trying to do the right thing even when it put her in danger." Sarah arranged for the portrait to be carefully preserved and displayed at the Hartford History Museum, with a plaque telling Elizabeth's full story. The exhibit would help visitors understand both early 20th century banking fraud and the courage of one young woman who refused to stay silent about corruption. Sarah looked at Elizabeth's portrait one last time before it was moved to the museum. She marveled at how one woman's desperate message, hidden in plain sight for more than a century, had finally revealed the truth. Elizabeth's smile, once a mystery, now stood as proof of her bravery, a reminder that ordinary photographs can hold extraordinary stories, waiting for someone willing to look closely enough to see what others missed. Elizabeth's legacy lived on. Her story was finally told,